Imagine this. A man wakes up one morning and decides he will no longer participate in the game that governs every waking moment of your life. Not politics, not religion, not even the pursuit of power or fame. Money. He looks at the bills in his wallet, the numbers glowing on his phone screen, the entire architecture of value that society has constructed, and he says one word: no. Before we go deeper, make sure you subscribe to this channel, leave a like, and share this message with someone who needs to hear it. What you're about to discover will challenge everything you thought you knew about freedom, power, and your own relationship with money. And I promise you, the final revelation will be the one that changes your perspective forever. At first, this seems absurd, perhaps even insane. After all, money is not just a tool. It is the very language through which we communicate worth, desire, and possibility. It is the invisible hand that guides nations, the silent contract that binds strangers across continents, the promise that makes civilization itself possible. To reject money is to reject the most fundamental agreement humanity has ever made. It is to step outside the boundaries of what we call reality. But here's what haunts you when you truly consider this man's choice. Why does his rejection feel so threatening? Why does something deep within you recoil at the thought of someone living completely outside the monetary system? Is it because you think he will fail? Or is it because you fear he might succeed and in doing so, reveal something unbearable about the life you've chosen to live? Think carefully about this paradox. We are told from birth that money brings freedom. We sacrifice decades of our lives, trading irreplaceable hours for paychecks, convincing ourselves that one day, after enough accumulation, enough security, enough zeros in our accounts, we will finally be free to live as we wish. Yet this man, by rejecting money entirely, has claimed that very freedom immediately. He has not waited for permission. He has not earned the right through years of labor. He has simply declared himself free, and in that declaration, he has exposed a truth that society cannot afford to acknowledge. The truth is this: the cage that confines you has no lock. It never did. Consider what happens in your own mind right now. As you contemplate this idea, do you find yourself constructing arguments against him? He's being irresponsible. What about emergencies? This won't work in the real world. Notice how quickly your thoughts rush to defend the system. Notice how uncomfortable you feel at the mere suggestion that life could be lived differently. This discomfort is not accidental. It is the sound of something inside you recognizing a possibility you've been trained to ignore. Because the man who rejects money is not simply making an economic choice. He is committing an act of existential rebellion. He is saying that the story we've all agreed to believe, that human value can be measured, that security comes from accumulation, that meaning is purchased rather than created, is nothing more than a story. And like all stories, it can be rewritten or abandoned entirely. But here's what makes him the greatest threat. His existence alone is contagious. You don't even need to speak with him. Simply knowing that someone lives this way plants a seed in your consciousness. It whispers a forbidden question that grows louder with each passing day. If he can live without money, what else that I believe is necessary might also be an illusion? This question is dangerous because it has no endpoint. Once you begin pulling at this thread, the entire fabric of your constructed reality begins to unravel. You start to see how much of your life is not chosen but choreographed by invisible forces. How many of your desires are truly yours, and how many were sold to you by advertisers who profit from your dissatisfaction? How many years have you spent chasing goals that were never yours to begin with? The man who rejects money forces you to confront these questions not through argument or persuasion, but through the simple fact of his existence. He is a mirror held up to everything you've been avoiding. And society fears mirrors. Institutions, governments, corporations, they all depend on your continued participation in the monetary system. They need you to believe that there is no alternative, that opting out means oblivion, that the game they've designed is the only game that exists. But what if it isn't? What if the greatest con ever perpetrated wasn't taking your money, but convincing you that without it, you are nothing? Stay with this discomfort. Let it expand. Because what we're about to explore will shake the foundations of everything you think you understand about power, freedom, and the invisible architecture that shapes your reality. The man who rejects money has discovered something that those in power desperately hope you never realize. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. To understand why the man who rejects money is such a profound threat, we must first excavate the psychological foundations upon which our entire relationship with money is built. This is not simply about economics or survival. It runs far deeper into the very core of how you perceive reality itself. Money, as the historian Yuval Noah Harari observed, is perhaps the most successful story ever told. More universal than religion, more binding than language. It is a collective hallucination that we've all agreed to participate in. And this agreement has become so deeply embedded in our consciousness that we've forgotten it's a choice at all. You were born into a world where money already existed as an unquestionable fact, like gravity or time. You never voted on whether to participate. You simply were enrolled. But here's what the psychologist Carl Jung understood about such collective arrangements. They operate primarily through what he called the collective unconscious, shared patterns of thought and behavior that exist below the level of conscious awareness. Money is not just in your wallet. It's in your psyche. It has infiltrated the deepest layers of how you construct meaning, measure worth, and imagine possibility. When you meet someone, how long before you wonder what they do for a living? When you consider a new path in life, how quickly does the question, "But can I afford it?" shut down your imagination? This is the invisible prison. The man who rejects money has somehow escaped this psychological conditioning. And his escape reveals something terrifying, that the bars were always in your mind, not in the world. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer wrote that man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills. What he meant was that our desires themselves are not freely chosen. They are shaped by forces beyond our control. Modern capitalism has perfected this insight into an art form. You believe you want that new car, that larger house, that promotion at work. But do you? Or have these desires been carefully constructed and implanted through years of advertising, social conditioning, and cultural narratives about success? The man who rejects money has somehow broken through this layer of manufactured desire. He has asked the most dangerous question possible. What do I actually want when I strip away everything society has told me to want? And in asking this question, he has discovered that most of what we chase has nothing to do with genuine need or authentic desire. It is borrowed wanting desires that belong to the system, not to the individual. Friedrich Nietzsche spoke of the herd mentality, the way human beings unconsciously conform to collective values without ever examining them. Money, he would argue, is the ultimate expression of herd mentality. We all agree it has value, not because it objectively does, but because we've all been trained to believe it does. The moment you question this belief, you step outside the herd. And the herd, Nietzsche warned, always punishes those who dare to think differently. This is why the man who rejects money triggers such visceral reactions. He represents the ultimate apostasy, not against a religion or a nation, but against the foundational myth that holds modern civilization together. He is living proof that the emperor has no clothes, that the system we serve is not inevitable or natural, but arbitrary and chosen. Consider the words of Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps and emerged with a profound insight that the last of human freedoms is the ability to choose one's attitude in any given circumstance. Even in the camps, stripped of everything, he found that meaning could not be taken from him, only surrendered. The man who rejects money has grasped this same truth. By refusing to let money define his worth or dictate his choices, he has reclaimed the fundamental human freedom that most of us have unknowingly surrendered, the freedom to determine what has value. But society cannot function if too many people realize this. The entire machinery of modern civilization, governments, corporations, financial institutions depends on your continued belief that money is not just useful, but essential. That without it, life is impossible. The man who lives without money shatters this illusion simply by existing. He doesn't need to preach or convert. His life is the sermon. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote that we are condemned to be free, that human beings cannot escape the weight of making choices, even though we desperately wish someone else would make them for us. Money, in many ways, is the ultimate escape from this existential burden. It provides a ready-made answer to the question of what matters. Whatever can be bought and sold. It transforms the terrifying openness of human existence into a simple transaction. Work, earn, spend, repeat. The man who rejects money has refused this escape. He has chosen to face existence in its raw, unmediated form. And in doing so, he forces everyone around him to confront the question they've been avoiding. What are you really living for? This is the hidden problem at the root of our relationship with money. It's not that we need it to survive, though that's what we tell ourselves. It's that we need it to avoid the deeper questions of existence. Money gives us purpose without requiring us to choose one. It gives us meaning without demanding we create it. It offers security without forcing us to confront our mortality. The man who rejects money has torn down all these comfortable illusions, and what he's discovered on the other side is both liberating and terrifying. That life without money is not death, but awakening. Now we must examine what happens when this rejection ripples outward, not just to the individual who has stepped outside the system, but to everyone who witnesses his choice. Because the consequences of rejecting money are not confined to one man's life. They spread like a virus through the collective consciousness, quietly destabilizing the invisible agreements that hold society together. The first consequence is psychological. The man who rejects money becomes a walking cognitive dissonance for everyone who encounters him. You see him living peacefully, perhaps even joyfully, without the thing you've been told is absolutely necessary for survival. And something inside you fractures. The French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu identified this as the collision between habitus, the deeply ingrained habits of thought and behavior that structure our lives, and a reality that contradicts those habits. When your habitus tells you that money equals security, but your eyes show you someone living securely without it, your mind enters a state of profound discomfort. This discomfort manifests in predictable ways. You might feel anger toward him, dismissing him as irresponsible or naive. You might feel superior, convinced that his way of life is unsustainable and that reality will eventually crush him. But beneath these reactions lies something far more unsettling: envy. Not envy of his poverty, but envy of his freedom. Because he has accessed something you desperately want, but have convinced yourself is impossible: the ability to live on his own terms, accountable to no employer, no creditor, no system of external validation. This is where the hidden power of his choice becomes clear. He doesn't need to convince you of anything. Your own reaction to him reveals the truth you've been suppressing, that much of your suffering is self-imposed, that the chains you wear were forged not by necessity but by fear, and that the life you're living may not be the life you would choose if you truly believed other options existed. The second consequence operates at the level of social control. Every system of power relies on leverage, the ability to offer rewards and threaten punishments. Money is the most efficient form of leverage ever invented. It can motivate behavior across vast populations without requiring direct force or explicit ideology. You don't need to believe in your employer's mission. You just need to believe you need the paycheck. You don't need to support government policies. You just need to fear losing access to the economic system those policies protect. But the man who rejects money has made himself immune to this leverage. You cannot bribe him with a higher salary. You cannot threaten him with poverty because he's already chosen it. You cannot manipulate him with the promise of security because he's discovered security outside the system. In the language of game theory, he has changed the rules of the game simply by refusing to play. And this refusal exposes a fundamental vulnerability in how power operates. It only works if people consent to be governed by its terms. Think about what this means for a moment. The entirety of modern governance and corporate control rests on the assumption that people need money and will do almost anything to get it. Tax systems, employment contracts, consumer markets, political campaigns, all of these depend on money being non-negotiable. The man who opts out reveals that it was always negotiable. He has found the exit door that everyone else has been told doesn't exist. The third consequence is perhaps the most insidious: the spread of dangerous questions. Once you've seen someone live without money, certain questions become impossible to ignore. Why do I spend most of my waking hours doing work I don't believe in? Why have I postponed the life I actually want to live until some distant future when I've earned enough? Why do I measure my worth by my net worth? Why does a number in a bank account determine whether I feel successful or like a failure? These questions are dangerous because they have no satisfying answers within the framework of the system. The system cannot explain why you should trade the irreplaceable hours of your one finite life for the accumulation of abstract numbers. It can only assert that you must, that there is no alternative, that this is simply how reality works. But the man living without money has proven that reality works differently than you've been told. And once that seed of doubt is planted, it grows in the darkness of your unexamined assumptions. Neuroscience reveals why this is so destabilizing. Your brain constructs reality through predictive models frameworks that tell you what to expect and how to respond. These models are incredibly resistant to change because updating them requires significant cognitive energy and creates temporary disorientation. The man who rejects money doesn't just challenge your beliefs, he forces your brain to rebuild its fundamental model of how the world operates. This process is uncomfortable, even painful. It's why people often react with hostility to ideas that contradict their worldview, even when those ideas might set them free. The fourth consequence manifests in the realm of cultural conditioning. From childhood, you've been immersed in a culture that constantly reinforces the supremacy of money. Success is measured in income. Intelligence is measured in earning potential. Even love is entangled with financial security. How many relationships have foundered on questions of money? The man who rejects money steps outside this entire cultural narrative. He reminds you that there was a time, not so long ago in human history, when people lived rich, meaningful lives without money at all. That communities thrived on reciprocity, gift-giving, and direct exchange of skills and resources. His existence whispers that the current system, this world where everything is monetized, where every interaction is a potential transaction, where even your attention has been turned into a commodity, is not the natural order of things. It is recent. It is constructed. And like all constructions, it can be deconstructed. This is why institutions respond to such individuals, not with rational debate, but with marginalization and ridicule. They cannot afford to engage with the questions these people raise because the questions themselves are revolutionary. Instead, they must discredit the messenger, frame the choice as insanity or naivety, ensure that his example doesn't spread. But it's already spreading. In your mind, right now, as you read these words, you're beginning to see the cage differently. And that's the ultimate unseen consequence. Once you truly understand that someone has escaped, you can never again believe the cage is inescapable. Now we arrive at the threshold of transformation, the point where understanding must become action, because knowing that the cage exists is not the same as walking out of it. The man who rejects money has shown you the door, but you must choose whether to walk through it. And that choice, that rebellion against everything you've been taught to believe is necessary, requires a radical shift in how you perceive reality itself. The first step in this rebellion is not external, but internal. It begins with what the existentialist philosophers called authenticity, the courage to distinguish between the life you've been told to live and the life that genuinely calls to you. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that most people live in bad faith, deceiving themselves about their own freedom because facing that freedom is terrifying. You tell yourself you have no choice but to work a job you hate, to accumulate possessions you don't need, to chase goals that leave you feeling empty. But the truth Sartre insisted upon is brutal. You always have a choice. You've simply been afraid to make it. The man who rejects money has made that choice. He has looked at the supposedly inevitable and declared it optional. But how did he do it? What inner transformation allowed him to see what others cannot see? History offers us clues. Consider Diogenes, the ancient Greek philosopher who lived in a barrel and owned virtually nothing. When Alexander the Great, the most powerful man in the known world, visited him and asked what favor he could grant, Diogenes replied, "Stand out of my sunlight." This was not mere rudeness. It was a philosophical statement. Diogenes recognized that he already possessed what Alexander spent his life conquering empires to achieve: freedom from wanting what he did not have. His poverty was not deprivation, but liberation. He could not be bought, threatened, or controlled because he had severed the psychological connection between his well-being and material accumulation. You can begin this same process right now, without abandoning everything. Ask yourself, what would I do with my life if money were not a consideration? Not, what would I buy? But what would I create, explore, or become? This question cuts through decades of conditioning. Most people cannot answer it honestly because they've spent so long defining themselves through economic roles that they've forgotten who they are beneath those roles. The second element of rebellion is the recognition that freedom and security are not opposites, but enemies. Society has taught you to seek security, the stable job, the retirement account, the insurance policies that protect against every conceivable disaster. But as the psychologist Erich Fromm observed, the pursuit of total security is actually an escape from freedom. Because freedom requires uncertainty. It demands that you trust yourself to navigate the unknown rather than surrendering your autonomy to systems that promise to manage your life for you. The man who rejects money has chosen freedom over security. This doesn't mean he's reckless or unprepared. It means he's recognized that the security the system offers is largely illusory. Your job can disappear tomorrow. Your savings can evaporate in an economic collapse. The stability you've sacrificed everything to achieve exists only as long as conditions beyond your control remain favorable. True security, he has discovered, comes not from accumulation, but from adaptability, from knowing you can create value, build relationships, and solve problems regardless of economic circumstances. Consider Henry David Thoreau, who retreated to Walden Pond not to escape the world, but to strip life down to its essentials and discover what was truly necessary. His experiment revealed that he could live on remarkably little, that most of what society called necessities were actually luxuries, and that the time and energy he'd spent earning money to buy these luxuries could instead be spent on reading, thinking, writing, and experiencing life directly. His 2 years at Walden were not about poverty, but about examining the hidden cost of affluence, that you trade your life for things, and in doing so, discover too late that you've sold the only irreplaceable resource you ever had. The third aspect of this rebellion involves reimagining value itself. Money reduces all value to a single-dimension price. But human life operates across countless dimensions that resist quantification. The value of a sunset, a meaningful conversation, a moment of creative insight, the trust of a friend, none of these can be purchased or assigned a price tag. The man who rejects money has not rejected value. He's rejected the reduction of all value to monetary terms. This shift allows you to begin measuring your life differently. Instead of asking, "How much money did I make today?" you might ask, "What did I learn? Who did I help? What did I create? How did I grow?" These questions point toward forms of wealth that accumulation can never achieve. And here's the paradox. The people who pursue these forms of wealth often find that their material needs are met anyway, through community support, skill exchange, and the organic reciprocity that emerges when people stop viewing every interaction as a transaction. Look at the example of Mahatma Gandhi, who lived with radical simplicity while leading a movement that liberated millions. His spinning wheel and simple clothing were not sacrifices, but choices that freed him from dependence on colonial economic systems. By reducing his own needs, he expanded his power. The man who rejects money has learned to distinguish between the discomfort of transformation and the suffering of genuine deprivation. He has discovered that you can be uncomfortable and free, whereas comfort and bondage often coexist. The final insight that enables this rebellion is understanding that you don't have to do it perfectly or completely. You don't need to abandon everything and live in a forest. The revolution begins with small acts of sovereignty, choosing to work less and have less rather than working more to have more, valuing time over money, measuring success by internal rather than external metrics. Each choice to prioritize your authentic values over economic optimization is a small rebellion that weakens the system's grip on your psyche. The man who fully rejects money is showing you an extreme version of a truth that applies at every level. The degree of your freedom is determined by how little you need from the system. Every step towards self-sufficiency, community interdependence, or value creation outside monetary exchange is a step toward liberation. And liberation, you're beginning to realize, was always closer than you thought. We have journeyed through the paradox, excavated the psychological roots, witnessed the unseen consequences, and explored the path of rebellion. But now we arrive at the deepest truth, the revelation that changes everything. The insight that the man who rejects money embodies and that society fears above all else. This is not merely another perspective or philosophical argument. This is the fundamental reality that, once seen, cannot be unseen. The ultimate truth is this. The man who rejects money is the greatest threat to society because he reveals that human beings are not economic units to be managed, but sovereign creators capable of generating meaning, value, and fulfillment entirely outside the systems designed to control them. He demonstrates that the authority you've granted to money, to institutions, to the entire apparatus of modern civilization was never theirs by right, it was yours by surrender. And what has been surrendered can be reclaimed. Think deeply about what this means. Every system of power throughout history has relied on a fundamental deception. that you are incomplete without it, that you need what it provides, that without its structure and guidance, you would collapse into chaos and suffering. The church told you that you needed its intercession to reach the divine. Kings told you that you needed their rule to maintain order. And now, the economic system tells you that you need money to survive, to have worth, to live a meaningful life. But the man who rejects money stands as living proof that this is a lie. Not a partial truth or an exaggeration, but a fundamental lie. He shows that life continues and often deepens when you step outside the system. That meaning is not purchased but created. That security comes not from accumulation but from capability and community. That your worth is not determined by your net worth but by the irreducible fact of your existence as a conscious being in this unfathomable universe. This is why he terrifies the structures of power. Because if enough people grasped this truth, the entire edifice would crumble, not through violence or revolution, but through mass awakening, through millions of individuals simultaneously realizing that their participation in the system is voluntary, that the chains binding them are self-imposed, that the authority they've granted to money is revocable at any moment. Consider the words of the Buddha, who taught that suffering arises from craving and attachment. He walked away from a palace, from guaranteed wealth and comfort, because he recognized that these things could never address the fundamental questions of human existence. Why are we here? What is the nature of consciousness? How should we live? The man who rejects money in our modern age is following this same ancient wisdom. He has recognized that the endless pursuit of wealth is itself a form of suffering, not because poverty is noble, but because the chase for money distracts you from the deeper work of understanding yourself and your place in existence. Money promises to solve your problems, but it cannot touch the real ones. It cannot give you meaning when you feel your life is purposeless. It cannot provide connection when you feel isolated. It cannot answer the question of who you are when you strip away all the roles and possessions. The man who rejects money has faced these real problems directly, without the anesthetic of accumulation to numb the existential questions. And here is where we encounter the most radical dimension of this truth. The man who rejects money has not rejected civilization, progress, or human flourishing. He has rejected the counterfeit version of these things that money has created. Because look honestly at what money has built. Yes, impressive technologies and medical advances and global networks of trade. But also, vast inequality, ecological devastation, the reduction of human beings to consumers, the commodification of every aspect of existence, the transformation of relationships into transactions. The man who steps outside this system is not retreating from civilization, but pioneering a new form of it, one based on genuine reciprocity rather than exchange, on intrinsic value rather than price, on community interdependence rather than isolated accumulation. He is not going backward to some primitive past. He is going forward to a possibility that money-based societies have made almost unimaginable. The final truth, then, is not about money at all. It's about authority. The man who rejects money has recognized that the ultimate authority over his life is not external, not employers, not governments, not markets, not even the collective weight of cultural expectations. The ultimate authority is consciousness itself, his own capacity to assign meaning, create value, and determine what constitutes a life well lived. And this authority has always been yours too. You've simply been convinced to delegate it, to outsource your own sovereignty to systems that profit from your dependence. The man who rejects money has stopped delegating. He has reclaimed the authority that was always his, and in doing so, he has become dangerous not to people, but to power. Not to civilization, but to the distorted version of civilization that requires your submission to justify its existence. So ask yourself now, with full honesty, what would you do if you truly believed you were free? Not free someday, not free if conditions change, but free right now, in this moment, to redefine your relationship with money, with success, with the entire narrative of how life should be lived. That question contains within it the seed of revolution. The man who rejects money has simply allowed that seed to grow, and his existence, quiet and unassuming as it may be, whispers the most dangerous idea of all. So could you. The world does not change when one man rejects money. The world changes when you realize that the story you've been living is not the only story available. When you understand that the cage has no lock. When you grasp that, Authority over your own existence has always belonged to you, and that reclaiming it is not rebellion but homecoming, a return to the sovereign being you were before society taught you to be small, manageable, and profitable. This is the truth that cannot be allowed to spread. This is why the man who rejects money must be marginalized, dismissed, forgotten. Because if his example takes root, if his questions spread, if his freedom becomes contagious, then the entire architecture of control loses its foundation. And those in power know, even if they cannot speak it aloud, that their authority exists only because you believe it does. The moment you stop believing, their power evaporates like morning mist. You stand now at a threshold. On one side, the familiar path of monetary pursuit, with all its promises and disappointments, its securities and anxieties, its well-worn grooves of acceptable ambition. On the other side, the unknown territory of authentic self-determination, where you measure your days not by earnings but by meaning, where you build wealth that cannot be taken because it exists in skills, relationships, creativity, and inner peace. The man who rejects money has crossed that threshold. He cannot tell you what you'll find on the other side, because that discovery is yours alone to make. But he can tell you this: the crossing is possible, the freedom is real, and the life waiting for you there is the one you've been seeking all along, hidden beneath the mountain of things you thought you needed. Now you know, and knowing, you can never fully return to innocence. The question is no longer whether another way of living is possible. The question is whether you have the courage to explore it,